In the velvet shroud of midnight, the footsteps echoed once more, soft, measured, circling the confines of his cell like the prowl of some spectral hunter through ancient woods. Don Carlos stirred from fitful slumber, his chest heaving with labored breaths, the meager straw pallet sodden beneath him from the ceaseless drip of perspiration. The gloom enveloped him, dense and oppressive, pierced solely by the wavering ember of a remote torch that slithered beneath the iron-barred portal, casting elongated shadows that danced. He held his breath, pulse thundering against the cage of his ribs, as the cadence receded into oblivion, supplanted by the harsh rasp of his own exhalations. Mere illusions, he reasoned, or perchance the insidious watch of his father's informants, ever vigilant in the labyrinthine intrigues of the Spanish court. The chill invaded through the unyielding masonry. He drew the tattered woolen shroud closer about his frame, yet it availed little against the relentless bite of winter's ghost. His fingertips grazed the jagged, unyielding expanse of the wall at his side, following the furrows he had etched into the mortar during paroxysms of raw despair, marks of a soul clawing toward elusive liberty. A bitter, ferrous residue tainted his palate, remnant of the scant ration thrust through the aperture earlier that eve. A viscous gruel, if such it merited the name, infused with the acrid whisper of corroded metal from the palace's shadowed larder. He had consumed it in stoic silence, though his vitals rebelled in silent agony. Famine had become his inexorable sentinel, eroding him from within as inexorably as tides upon a crumbling shore. His thoughts, adrift in the void, meandered inexorably to the opulent existence forfeited the resplendent galleries of the Alcazar, where tapestries woven with threads of gold depicted the visage of his sire materialized unbidden, austere, inscrutable, those obsidian orbs perceiving not a progeny but a peril to the ironclad lineage of the Habsburgs. "You are no heir of mine." Those syllables seared anew, more keenly than the manacles encircling his wrists, forged in the royal armories of Toledo. A resonant clash of ferrous against stone jolted him rigid. The observation grate in the portal sprang ajar, and for an ephemeral instant, the footfalls would resurface. They invariably did, as predictable as the Vespers bell tolling from the distant cloisters of the Escorial. In the ensuing hush, he pondered their veracity, ethereal visitations, or the encroaching murmur of his unraveling psyche. Once, the corridors of the Alcazar had resonated with mirth, his own among them, a cascade of youthful exuberance amid the somber pomp of Philip's reign, now, as the dungeon's frost infiltrated his marrow, those echoes taunted him with their remoteness. In his youth, he had embodied the tempestuous vigor of a realm forged in conquest from the sun-baked plains of Castile to the mist-shrouded isles of the New World, where galleons laden with silver swelled the coffers of an empire unchallenged. Yet even then, umbral tendrils had enshrouded him. One instant, he captivated with eloquence, his repartee coaxing fleeting levity from the most rigid of grandees, evoking the chivalric poets of old. The next, fury erupted, his utterances thundering like cannonades from the Armada, dispatching attendants in frantic retreat. "The Infante fares unwell," they intoned in covert asides, their words drifting like incense through the vaulted halls. King Philip II, architect of an absolutism, Carlos evoked the sovereign's countenance pallid, immutable as Carrara marble quarried for the Escorial's austere facade, those fathomless eyes omitting naught. The monarch had withheld paternal solace, a chasm yawning between them from infancy. Carlos had sensed it keenly, the latent query suspended like a headsman's blade. Might this scion? The regent's palm descended swifter than a falcon's stoop. The report reverberated through the antechamber like a clarion of judgment. "You shall assimilate deference," Philip had intoned, his timbre laced with the gravitas of one. He had hurled a valet down marble staircases for besmirching his doublet with malmsey. He had pulverized a mirror of Murano provenance, its facets mocking his fractured visage. The assemblage suspended animation in his proximity, bracing for the impending conflagration, much as they did amid the pyres of the Inquisition's tribunals, and Philip observed ceaseless, a peril to his person, to the very sinews of Hispania. Carlos discerned their colloquies. He noted the protracted scrutiny of his father's regard during privy councils, appraising him as one might a flawed race. He inveighed against his progenitor's dominion, the asphyxiating fetters of obligation, the deity who had afflicted him with a scepter forever denied. The sovereign discovered him prostrate before the reredos, akin to a penitente imploring absolution, or an insurgent hatching sedition beneath the gaze of saints depicted in oils by the masters of Seville. Their stares converged in the taper's tremulous luminescence. Utterances, the obscurity in Philip's scrutiny, intensified that eve, and Carlos, for the inaugural occasion, comprehended unadulterated dread, the dread of a lineage where sons were but pawns upon a grand escutcheon. His progenitor beheld not offspring, but an adversary to the atmosphere reeked of beeswax tapers guttering in silver sconces and the perennial dampness of Toledan stone, the tranquility fractured solely by the monastic campanile's remote knell, evoking the austere piety of Philip's monastic retreats. Then, the tramp of sabatons, scores of them advancing in martial cadence along the gallery. He pivoted as the portal splintered inward. Foremost strode the Duke de Alba, scourge of the Low Countries, his countenance an enigmatic bas-relief. By edict of His Most Catholic Majesty, Don Felipe II, the Duke proclaimed, his inflection barren as the deserts of Nueva España, you stand accused and shall be detained. Carlos, a quixotic endeavor. Limbs ensnared him, vice-like, contorting his arms posteriorly. He convulsed, hurling maledictions redolent of the Moors' vanquished citadels, yet they compelled him earthward. This is untenable, he spewed. I am your infante. Alba's demeanor remained immutable, no longer. They conveyed him through the Palacio, as murmurs trailed him like contraband spices from the Indies. They aver he conspired with the Calvinist burghers of the Netherlands. I gleaned he essayed regicide via the apothecary's filters. Insanity courses through his veins, as in the annals of imperial forebears. Fabrications, everyone yet in the court's Byzantine web, verity yielded to expedients. The ultimate countenance he beheld ere the abyss engulfed him was his father's. Philip loomed atop the balustrade, immobile as a colossus hewn from granite, overseeing his heirs plunge into perdition. Their gazes interlocked in a final, mute colloquy, no ire, no contrition, merely the glacial arithmetic of a potentate excising an aberration from the dynastic ledger. The portal clanged to, the bolt rasped. Thus, Don Carlos, Infante of Asturias, presumptive sovereign of the Spains and their ultramarine appanages, evaporated from the tapestry of existence. Solitary amid the Stygian pall, he abutted his brow to the gelid flagstones. The susurrus of perfidy lingered in his auditory halls. The ambience congealed with the miasma of verdigris, and his own corporeal squalor, a putrid bouquet adhering to his dermis, akin to a leper's winding sheet. His erstwhile sumptuous raiment had disintegrated into tatters, the heraldic brocades now amorphous amid the unravelling weft. He abutted a quivering palm to the partition, digits delineating the incisions where he had abraded the cement in vain bid to chronicle the inexorable flux. His ungs were splintered, ensanguined from the exertion. The barriers reciprocated naught, no solar ray infiltrated. Illumination emanated exclusively from the extraneous flambeau, its luminescence infiltrating the threshold in slender, vacillating filaments. He had cultivated antipathy toward that gleam, its tantalizing intimation of realms extraneous to these quadrilateral confines, dominions he would behold no more, where armadas cleaved the ocean's breast, and conquistadors claimed continents in the name of the cross and crown. His physique capitulated. The pyrexia surged and ebbed in undulations, consigning him to rigors one juncture, deluged in transpiration the subsequent. His articulations throbbed, his abdomen a cavernous abyss devouring its light, yet mortality tarried with inexhaustible forbearance. Nocturnally, or what he construed as such, the Murines materialized, their advent heralded by minuscule talons pattering upon the pavers, their ululations akin to derision in the void. Subsequently, audacity burgeoned. They encroached, their obsidian orbs coruscating in the penumbral haze. He had essayed, now he reclined inert, observing as they banqueted upon detritus beyond his depleted reach. Perchance they shall sup upon me anon. The conjecture ought to have engendered terror. Contrarily, it elicited a rasping, fractured cachinnation rebounding as burlesque. His intellect frayed at the seams. Reverie upon arousal, gasping. The enclosures invariably constricted, inexorably proximate. Occasionally, countenances materialized in the penumbra. His sire's glacial scrutiny, his dam's spectral benevolence, the nebulous traits of a paramour conceivable in an alternate chronicle of the Habsburgs. One juncture diurnal or crepuscular he lacerated the barriers until his phalanges hemorrhaged, bellowing for emancipation, radiance, aught save this interminable ebon. The sentinels disregarded, they perpetually did, their allegiance forged, his progenitor governed with the precision of a celestial orrery. The cosmos persisted, and herein, cradled by the dungeon's maw, Don Carlos was consigned to oblivion. The custodians conversed in subdued timbres, presuming seclusion. He ululates akin to an infernal imp, one intoned, redistributing his mass sans the cell's threshold. The flambeau's caper accentuated the ante-meridium perjuration, imploring clemency or dissolution I discern not which. His counterpart, a veteran with hoary mandibular adornment, emitted a guttural affirmation and invoked the crucifix, maledictus, if solicited. No mortal emits such lamentations sans a daemon gnawing his essence. Tranquillity ensued as a domestic she faltered, her scrutiny flitting to the ponderous robal barrier interning Don Carlos. "Is veracity in the calumnies?" she queried, timbre quavering like a lute string. In the sculleries, epicures interchanged glances amid kneading the farinaceous mass. "Ava," he rends his integument. One confided, abrading amyloidal residue upon her tablier. Affirms the partitions respire. In the mews, equerries quaked despite the estival swelter. Gleaned, he communes with spectres, a juvenile ostler divulged, caressing a skittish palfrey's withers. Denominates them his dam, his pedagogue. Even the grandees who erstwhile genuflected in Don Carlos's aura now invoked his nomenclature with amalgamated commiseration and repugnance. Derangement permeates the sanguine, yet not all susurrations bore such disdain. In the Palacio's reticent alcoves, where mural attenuations and fidelities proved diaphanous, audacity ventured utterance. And if derangement eludes him, if veracity resides in his averments, a novice amanuensis, commissioned to ledger the Infante's diminishing provender, demurred sans the cell one vesper. The vociferations had abated, supplanted by an uncanny, cadenced abrasion akin to ungs upon lithics. Defying prudence, he abutted his oracle to the robel. Not substantive, none. The Infante's timbre grated, lacerated and fissured, yet hastening hence, the conjecture adhered. And if the Infante raved not, if he alone pierced the veil, by Aurora, even that murmur dissipated, interred beneath the regent's taciturnity, the sentinel's atavisms, and temporality's implacable procession. And intra his enclosure, Don Carlos cachinated, subdued and sundered at the jest solely he deciphered. The cosmos denominated him deranged, yet derangement, he discerned, constituted the sole rational riposte to such a cosmos where thrones were erected upon the ossuaries of kin, and empires devoured their progeny. The leech materialized at crepuscule, convoked by an anomalous rescript from the sovereign. Dr. Mendoza, emaciated savant with phalanges stained by sepia inks and a brow eternally creased, had ministered to patricians and plebeians alike, yet never a captive of this ilk, never an infante transmuted to wraith. The wardens escorted him through the meandering subterra, their flambeaux excoriating grotesque umbrae from the hygrophilous barriers. "You shall inspect him," the decurion growled, timbre subdued. "Not ameliorate, his majesty's fiat." Mendoza inclined his pate. Don Carlos, contorted as a maimed beast in the remotest recess. His erstwhile regal physique attenuated to osseous relic. The Infante's hirsute tresses adhered to his cavitied jowls, his labia fissured and oozing, his orbs, fluttering agape, lustrous with pyrexia. "Another simulacrum," he rasped. "Timbre a ruination of its quondam timbre, or hither to exsanguinate me sanguisug." Mendoza genuflected proximal, depositing his quirbuli script with meticulousness. He recoiled not as the Infante shied, nor as a skeletal griff lashed in impudent defiance. "I sojourn to succor Alteza," he prevaricated. The scrutiny was expeditious. The leech's manumissions traversed with erudite celerity, divesting the Infante's lacerated habiliments to unveil the suppurant lesions beneath. Chancres where gyves had incised his carpi, the crimson filigrees of contagion arachniding cephalad, his costae protruding akin to a menagerie's gratings, his respirations superficial and stertorous. "He necessitates remediation," Mendoza articulated acerbically, pivoting to the phalanx. "Aseptic ligatures, a febrifuge, this constitutes not scrutiny, but attestation to parricide." A desiccate cachinnation percolated from Don Carlos's gorge. "Convey to my sire," he wheezed, "his leech possesses a versifier's lingua. Shall he suspend you therefore, I speculate?" The sentinels fidgeted. One traced the cruciform. Mendoza demurred, not for pharmacan defiance of regal edict proved untenable, but for a diminutive ampulla of essence de lavanda. He decorked it, permitting the fragrance to lacerate the cell's malodorous haze, and anointed a droplet upon the infante's radial artery, a nugatory rite, an ephemeral benevolence amid the court's merciless calculus. Don Carlos inspirited. For an instant, lucidity scintillated in their abysses. "She donned lavande," he susurrated. "My dam cognized you that?" Mendoza proffered no riposte. He could not, the poignancy constricting his throat akin to a garrote of Genoese silk. The decurion harumphed. "Tempus exhaustum." As the leech ascended, Don Carlos's griff extrapolated. "Appear I deranged to you?" Mendoza encountered his scrutiny. Veracity coiled in his forces. In the flambeau-lit vestibule, the decurion scrutinized the leech suspiciously. "You shall apprise his majesty the Infante ails, as anticipated. Naught beyond." Mendoza assented perfunctorily, inwardly scripting the equivocations. Yet in his cardiac sanctum, an alternate verity germinated. Certain maladies defied palliation, originating not in soma, but in the coroner's inexorable malediction where paternal love yielded to the exigency. Famine manifested as a falchion, excoriating him to vacuity. Don Carlos reclined, contorted upon the flagstones. His abdomen convulsed in a ligature so constrictive respiration proved arduous. The terminal repast extruded through the aperture had crawled with larvae, yet he ingested rapaciously, retching as the putrescence descended his gullet. Now even that vanished, bequeathing solely the voracious lacuna. A susurrus impelled him to elevate his pate. Murinae. They egressed from the umbrae akin to minuscule pilferers, vibrissae quivering, orb. He had acclimated to their imminence, their temerity scavenging detritus beyond his debilitated ambit. But now, observing their patter across the pavers, a novel cogitation burgeoned, accelerating his pulse. Yet inanition eroded hauteur, distilling a mortal to primal imperatives, as it had the famished peons of the Indies' enfeudations. His phalanges convulsed. One murine, audacious paramount, advanced, olfacting the effracted hem of his sleeve. Don Carlos suspended respiration. Then, with celerity astounding his enfeeblement, he propulsed. His palm encompassed thermal pelage. The beast emitted a stridulation, contorting in his vice, talons excoriating his dermis. He gnashed dentition, augmented compression, and fractured its cervical. The report was diminutive, terminal. For protracted instants he contemplated the flaccid corpus in his palm, his vitals roiling with loathing. Then inanition bellowed, eclipsing ignominy. He delayed no further. The primordial mastication proved most arduous. The sarcus was indurate, the savour metalline and grumous, yet his soma disregarded. It clamoured for nutriment, and he complied, rending the rodent akin to a famished lurcher. Sanguine besmirched his mentum. The excoriations upon his phalanges he scarcely registered. By the tertiary mastication, lacrimae cascaded. The murinae, intuiting peril, decamped. All save one, diminutive, tarrying proximal the barrier, immobilized by trepidation. Don Carlos abraded his maw with his metacarpus and propulsed anew. This juncture, he abstained from immediate immolation. The beast's stridulations inundated the enclosure as his dentition submerged in its ventral. Thermal sanguine inundated his maw, and he convulsed, yet compelled deglutition. The rodent convulsed, its minuscule cardiac palpitating contra his lingual, until ultimately, benignly, he consumed until osseous remnants alone subsisted. Then he prostrated laterally, his physique quaking, his intellect adrift in nebulosity. To what have I transmogrified? The riposte emanated in his sire's timbre, glacial and derisive. Precisely what I perpetually discerned you to embody. Cachinnation percolated in his gorge, lacerated and fissured. He permitted its effluence, rebounding from the barriers, until it transmuted to an alternate. A gemitus, a vociferation, an orison to the saints who had forsaken the Habsburg line. Extraneous, the sentinels fidgeted restively, interchanging scrutinies. He has irrevocably succumbed, one intoned. But Don Carlos hearkened not. He envisioned the proximate murine already. The domestique damsel, Ana, had no sanction tarrying proximal the Infante's enclosure. She cognized the perils. The regent's ire was legendary, chronicled in the auto de fe's lurid scrolls, and inquisitive. Ana abutted her dorsum to the glacial lithic, phalanges entwining in her tablia's asperus weft. The flambeau capered, projecting elongated umbrae cavorting akin to lemures along the gallery. The sentinels had laxed in vigilance. Why sentinel? A mortal extant solely in nomenclature. A muffled gemmitus permeated the robel. Ana's respiration faltered. She ought not, but the Infante's timbre, lacerated and fissured, ensnared an essence in her pectoral, aqua. The supplication so attenuate, she nigh overlooked it. Her orbs flitted to the situla at her pedals, replete with scullery detritus, indurated pan, a cuneus of caesium, a utricle of fluid pilfered sub rosa from the epicure's purview. It sufficed not lavishly, yet transcended the Infante's septuagenary vista. Her palm hovered supra the aperture's cowl. Execute, eschew, fealty warred with compassion. The sovereign had mandated inanition, the spirit-fracturing antecedent the soma, as in the protracted sieges of Alba's campaigns. Transgression constituted lese majestad, but Ana recollected the puerile Infante. Audacious, indubitably, yet with a rictus illuminating chambers akin to solstice flambeau in the Alcazar's Yuletide fetes. She had witnessed him dispersing nummi to mendicants, convoking with ostlers, clandestinely distributing confections to scullery juveniles subspecie no one's observance. That pure had evaporated, effaced by regal fiat. Merited he decease thus? Her phalanges quavered as she elevated the cowl. The enclosure's effluvium exuded. Acidulous exudation, suppuration, the metaline whisper of obsolescent sanguine. She convulsed yet compelled. She extruded the utricle through the aperture. It collided with the flagstones with a subdued thud. The Infante stirred not. For a dire instant, she apprehended decease. Then languidly his pate pivoted, orbs cavitied, pyretic, fixated upon the donative. He lurched anterior, gyves clanging, and appropriated the utricle with tremulous palms. He imbibed rapaciously. Fluid cascading adown his mentum, pectoral. Upon depletion, he contemplated the vacuous. She extruded the pan and caseus, then retracted her palm as if excoriated. The Infante assailed the viands akin to a sylvan beast, dentition rending the loaf with vehemence eliciting her recoil. A sabot rasped lithic posterior. Ana pivoted. The decurion loomed at the galery's terminus, mien indecipherable. Her sanguine congealed, he cognized. She genuflected, intellect racing for pretexts, but the decurion pivoted hence, his sabatons reverberating into taciturnity. Ana exhalated, femora enervated with alleviation, but fleeing the subterra, the Infante's timbre pursued, a susurrus in the umbra. Gracious, the utter she could not. Yet, even as she adjured it, she foreknew recidivation on the morrow. The pyrexia dominated now. Don Carlos reclined upon the glacial lithic, his soma a cartography of torment, each inspiration a pugilism, each systole a languid remonstrance contra inevitability. The enclosure undulated circum him, the barriers respiring ingress-egress akin to a he could no longer differentiate palpebrae, agape, or closed. The obscurant had vivified, importuning his oracles, coiling circum his limbs, akin to an Erastes caress. Mater, she materialized in the recess, laved in luminescence, anomalous. Maria Manuela de Portugal, her faces as recollected from effigies in the Alcazar's gallerias, Lenis, benign, the spectre of Erictus upon her labia. She extended a palm, phalanges pallid as Selenic. You emulated me excessively, she intoned. Excessive igneous for this glacial cortege. Carlos attained for her, but his gyves restrained. The ferrum incised his carpi, evoking frescal sanguine. Conduct me, come you, he implored. Her rictus vacillated. Not yet, mi amor. Then she dissipated, and the enclosure vacuated anew. He gasped, the phantasmal dissolving akin to fumarole. The pyrexia-limbed novel tableau across the umbra, a thronal vast and resonant, the corona hispanica reposing upon a samite cushion, his sire's timbre boomed ex umbris. Nunquam dignus. Carlos cacinate, the sonance egressed as a sibilus, pulmones incendiary. Cognosco, he susurrated. The corona iridesced, then liquefied in a stagnamorium adpeds. Another faces flickered manifest. Isabel, his desponsata, his quasi-sponsor, her obscura orbs dilated with meror. She had been a puella when obnoxia to him in his sire's ludic stratagems. He had scarcely cognized her. Yet herein she genuflected proximal, her lenis phalanges abrading his sinciput. Felicitas could have been yours, she articulated. Nay, he rasped, not in hoc mundo. She inclined proximal, her afflatus calidus contra his oris. Then occlude your palpebrae, mi principe. The sequent shall prove benignia. A portal rasped, but his sire loomed supra him. Rey Felipe II, resplendent in sombre velvet evoking the penitential garb of the Escorial's cloisters, his faces indecipherable. The flambeau gilded the contours of his maxilla, the argent in his barbe. He evinced every digitus the potentate. Carlos's respiration faltered. Hither to spectate my decease? Felipe proffered no riposte. His scrutiny traversed his filius's ruinated soma, the cavitates of his jowls, the suppurant lesions. Felipe pivoted hence. Mora. Carlos's timbre, a raw excoriation. Divulga. Eratni unquam substantivum? Ulum. The regent demaratus at the portal. For a cardiac pulsation, Carlos anticipated locution. Then the portal occluxit, and the obscurant engulfed omnia. Solitary anew, Don Carlos permitted his pate to recidivate contra the lithic. The phantasms recidivated. His dam's palm, the frigus infiltrated profundius, decelerating his pulsus, his cogitationes. Don Carlos no longer sentient the gyves. His soma imponderabilis, adrift in the umbra. The pyrexias igneus had consumptum to faville, bequeathing solely a taciturn, reptant torpor. He exhalated, observing his afflatus nebulosus in the air. Unum plurs phantasma ad sociandum, extraneous to the enclosure, a campanile narrated, media nocte fortas, or his exequiae. Permit resonare, he had pugnavit diu contra the barriers, the inanition, the taciturnitas, nunc nihil residuum pugnae, his sire triumphaverat. Hispania, the domestique damsel Anna genuflexit proximal iterum, her faces pallida in the tenuis lumini. She permitta humidum lintium ad his sinciput, her manum tremula, non debuisti he murmurovit, nec tu, she susurravit retro, he voluit cacinare. Pro, tu civit, the sapor cupri inundans his maw, Anna abstasit the sanguine ex his labia cum the margo of her manicam. Narrow mihi, he rasped. Locunturn ad huc de me supranis, she demerata, ita, mendacia, igitur, quaedam, her vox vacillavit, sed non omnia, meminae. A scintilla caloris flickered in his pector. Quid meministi? Cacinasti cum ducessa castigavite. He oblitus erratid. The memoria surfaced akin to a diutinus perditus numus clarus fugax. Amara errant, he recollectavit. The pueri fesserunt tales faces, eta rictus vix, delexerunt te proeo, the campanile narrated iterum, Don Carlos's palpebrae gravitae facti, the umbra premabat, sedium non formidabat eum. Anna's manus invenit his, her digiti parvi, et calidi contra his vastatus cutis. Manabisna? He interrogavit. Usque ad finem, she spopondit. He occluxit his palpebrae. The ultimus afflatus reliquit his pulmones akin to a suspirium, lenis, honore exemptus, et in the taciturnitate sequita, Anna lacrimavit. Ultra the enclosure, Hispania dormiabat, the rex non movit. The mundus versatus, invisus, sed in the umbra, ubi nemo umquam spectaret, unum candela flickered ad vitam, et a princeps tandem erat.